Hello, hello! Welcome to the Decay Learning Center, here to teach you about the weird, the macabre, and the fascinating bits of history that are gonna haunt the corners of your mind. I'm your host, Senta Decay, and I've been dying to meet you. Episode 5, Jeanne de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany. Ahoy there, mateys! Today we are celebrating one of history's most badass women and telling the story of Jeanne de Clisson. Now this is perhaps one of the more, if not the most romantic stories we'll probably ever cover on this channel, as we're gonna explore how she went from a noblewoman to a dreaded pirate queen. And this is gonna be a tale of love, of loss, and bloody revenge, if you haven't guessed that part already. So get yourself a mug of grog, because we're going back to the 1300s, and starting at the very beginning of Jeanne's life. Jeanne de Clisson was not born Jeanne de Clisson, she was actually born Jeanne de Belleville, because she grew up in a town called Belleville, which was in the French side of the border of Brittany. She was born to noble parents and thus was a noble herself. Her parents married her off at the age of 12, which might sound crazy in today's age, but it was also crazy back then. Yes, the life expectancy was much shorter, but even at this point, marrying your daughter off at 12 was a wild move. They married her off for political motives, and she was married to a 19-year-old named Geoffrey de Chateaubriand the 8th. Together, they had a son and daughter when Jeanne was the age of 14 and 16. In 1326, Geoffrey died and left the 26-year-old Jeanne a widow and a single mother. She was still young and she had kids to raise. So less than 2 years later, Jeanne married Guy de Penthièvre, but this was a complete disaster. A local family who also had significant political power, the de Blois, wanted Penthièvre to marry their daughter Marie, and not Jeanne. Now, Marie de Blois was the niece of the future king of France, Philip VI. So they had significant power and sway already. And her parents, because of this, were able to manage to go to the Pope and convince him to absolutely nullify the marriage between Jeanne and Guy de Penthièvre in 1330. So this couple only had 2 years together before another family rendered their marriage invalid due to their own political aspirations. Now, Penthièvre didn't get a happy ending out of this either, because he ended up dying mysteriously before he was able to marry Marie de Blois. Jeanne, however, would marry again in the year 1330 to a man named Oliver de Clisson IV. You'd think at this point that after being forced into a political marriage at the age of 12 as a child bride, to having her second marriage nullified due to another family's political aspirations, that Jeanne would have been completely jaded and miserable in her third marriage, right? Well, she actually absolutely adored Oliver IV de Clisson and considered him the love of her life. They were very happily married together and had 5 children during this time. They also held a sizable portion of land between the two of them, and had a fair share of power to go along with it, which made them significant political figures. Unfortunately, when there's power, there's trouble, and this proved to be true for the lovebirds. So we need to explain a little bit of the political landscape that this couple was living in, because this is going to play a big part of our story. Now, the 100 Years' War started up 7 years into their marriage, in the year 1337, between England and France. This started because in 1328, the King of France died without any heirs, leaving the English King Edward III as the nearest in line to the throne. But France and England were already pretty heated rivals, so the French nobility rejected his claim to the throne and put their own candidate, Philip VI, who we spoke about before, on the throne. Edward III seemed to actually accept this decision, until France annexed one of England's prized territories in 1336. Now, this caused Edward to declare war on King Philip and France. The war was brutally long and filled with famines, epidemics, and just hardships for both sides. So the political state of affairs was already an absolute mess. Now, this involves Brittany, as it was in between England and France, and also where Clisson was located. It was pulled into the conflict between England and France. In 1341, John III, the good Duke of Brittany, died without an heir, which kind of see the parallel to the start of the 100 Years' War here, but apparently this was common. On his deathbed, he was actually asked who should take over, and he begged for them to just leave him alone. He didn't want to deal with this anymore. He said, "Don't trouble my spirit with these matters. It's not my problem." So France and England got very invested in who would become the ruler of Brittany after his death, both offering official candidates. France backed Charles de Blois, which, if that name sounds familiar, it should, because he was the brother of Marie de Blois, the woman whose parents got Jeanne's second marriage annulled for their own political motives. The English, on the other hand, supported John of Montfort. And we mentioned before that Charles de Blois was actually the nephew of the current King Philip VI of France, who was warring with England. So this became a fight of its own, called the War of the Breton Succession. Now, we mentioned that Jeanne was born in France. She inherited a lot of land from her parents, which her and Oliver controlled at this point. So if they backed England, they stood to lose a good portion of the land that fell outside of the borders of Brittany. So they opted to support the French and Charles de Blois in the war. It seemed like an obvious choice for them. The English army seized a city, Vannes, in Brittany, and the French king, Philip VI, sent Oliver de Clisson there to assist with the city's defense. Now, Oliver unfortunately ended up getting captured by the English. While he was being held prisoner, the Pope got involved to prevent the conflict from escalating any further because things were getting out of hand. And King Philip of France and King Edward of England agreed to a truce and to exchanging prisoners. This wasn't free, however, it was for ransom, but still, it seemed like things were moving in a good direction, right? Well, unfortunately, the English asked for such a low ransom for Oliver de Clisson that Charles de Blois was very suspicious that Oliver betrayed France and didn't really try to defend the city of Vannes. In his opinion, if Oliver had put up enough of a fight against England, they would have considered him a pain and would have raised his ransom amount to make up for the nightmare he caused for them. So he was concerned that he either didn't try at all or just kind of like rolled over and let them take over because he was betraying France to England. Oliver de Clisson was released and was allowed to go back home and greet his family after being in prison, which seemed awesome, except he was then invited, along with another group of minor lords, to Paris for a tournament to celebrate the truce between the warring parties. And this is where things would unfortunately take an even worse turn. This was a trap, and Oliver de Clisson and the others were imprisoned and put on trial. Now, Jeanne found out about this and protested against this arrest, trying to secure Oliver's release by saying the tournament was supposed to provide safe conduct to everyone, and he shouldn't have been arrested under that premise. This fell on deaf ears and didn't work at all. And some records say she even attempted to bribe an official in Paris to let him go or help him escape. This also did not work, and unfortunately, Oliver de Clisson was found guilty with absolutely no evidence provided after coercing a confession from him, which was probably under really horrendous terms. He was then beheaded on August 2nd, 1343. So now you have to remember that Oliver de Clisson was a nobleman, which makes the following absolutely insane, and it was pretty much unheard of at the time. After being beheaded, they took his body and put it in a barred cage called a gibbet in Paris to openly display his rotting body to the public. His head was also put on display on a stake in a place called Nantes. Noble bodies were not often mutilated and put on display for the public like this, so the French nobility were pretty shocked by this act, but it served as a warning of what would happen to those who betrayed France, even though there was no proof he did anything. Oliver de Clisson had no proof in his case. So now, what happened to Jeanne after this? Jeanne de Clisson was absolutely heartbroken. That's an understatement. This was the love of her life. But she was also filled with rage. She thought her marriage to her true love was unjustly ended after just 13 years. It wasn't fair. So what did she do? She took the 2 sons that she had with Oliver, one also named Oliver, the other named Guillaume, to Nantes and had them witness their father's decapitated head in person. She told her children that Charles de Blois and King Philip of France were directly responsible for his death, and she swore revenge on the both of them. So what did she do? She was smart. She was angry, but she was smart, and she knew that her lands were probably going to get taken from her because her husband was found to be a traitor, and she was a single mother at this point. So she went back home and sold all of her land, all of her jewels, her dresses, all the furniture, everything she had, and used that money to start a small army up. And she went after Charles de Blois. The first place she went to was the castle of Tufaux, which was loyal to de Blois, and eventually fell under her army's attacks. Now, one version of the story is they just sieged the castle, and after a while were able to take it over. Another version says she tricked them by going to the castle's gate in tears, acting the part of a grieving widow to be invited in. And once they opened the gates, her army stormed the castle. Now, no matter which story you believe, they both ended the same way. She had everyone in the castle killed besides one survivor who she left alive to spread word that Jeanne de Clisson was coming for revenge. It was a complete Kill Bill story, and it was incredible. But she wasn't done. Her crew continued to attack numerous castles, including Chateau Thibaude, killing everyone and leaving one survivor behind once again. Now, tales of terror began to spread about her and earned her the nickname the Lioness of Brittany. She got this nickname because the coat of arms for the Clisson family depicted a crowned lion roaring, almost in like a battle type stance. So that was Jeanne. She was mad, she was roaring, and she was taking her revenge. So while this was going on, word made its way over to England to King Edward III. And he realized he could use Jeanne de Clisson. So he offered his support to her and gave her a fleet of 3 ships. She had these ships painted black and dyed the sails red, which, can I just say, awesome color combination. Love this style for her. Fashion icon Jeanne de Clisson over here. She did that with her ships, and she named the flagship of this fleet, the one she sailed upon, My Revenge. She took her sons with her, Guillaume and Oliver, on this naval journey for vengeance. And this is how she became a pirate queen. So the Lioness of Brittany found her calling, being a pirate. You would think someone that came from noble birth who had no experience with this would kind of struggle with it, but it seemed like a natural talent for her. So she absolutely terrorized the English Channel, primarily targeting the French ships. Her legend and reputation grew even more fearsome on the seas, and she was reported as a pirate queen who granted no quarter and would just plunder and then sink her enemy's ship, leaving all dead except for one survivor to spread the tales of her terror. There are even some stories that said de Clisson would personally behead any nobles on these ships with an axe, as a tribute to her beheaded husband. It was said that the French crews used to say if they saw crimson sails emerging from the fog, that was their death sentence. They knew it was over. She sank a number of French ships this way, and even assaulted coastal villages in Normandy. Her terrifying fleet with its black ships and red sails was called the Black Fleet, not only because of its painted wood, but also from the bleak fate of anyone who crossed de Clisson. It was a death sentence at this point. Now, some English documents from around this period actually name her as an ally to England, such as the 1347 Treaty of Calisson. Others call her a traitor to France, but either way, there are written records of her seafaring ventures here. This has been proven to be true. She would even ferry supplies over to Englishmen fighting in France from England. This made her very useful to England during this time and very terrible for France to have as an enemy, because she was giving support to their enemy during the battles. King Philip would end up dying in 1350, but not to de Clisson's hand. However, Charles de Blois still lived, so her vengeance continued. She wasn't done. After having many ships sunk though, the new king of France was fed up with de Clisson as an enemy, and sent his best men after her and her ships. Unfortunately for de Clisson, a storm hit during the battle between the two, and her flagship was sunk. She was able to escape the wreckage with her sons, but they were lost at sea without food and water. Guillerme died of exposure during this time. So de Clisson watched her son die while drifting on the ocean after her fleet was sunk by France, which again is not really the best way to pacify a woman that is already after vengeance for you. She was lucky in a way because English sympathizers rescued her and Oliver after 5 days on the water, and she was welcomed back in England as a hero. Her reign as a pirate lasted 13 years until the year 1356, which is kind of sweet in a way because every year of pirating matched a year of her marriage to Oliver. She was married for 13 years, she was a pirate for 13 years. Now, in the same year that her pirating ventures came to an end, there was a man named Sir Walter Bentley, and he claimed a victory over the French army that dwarfed the size of his own forces. At the same time, the French candidate for Brittany's title was captured by the English, so the English were in really good standing at this point of the war. The English king rewarded Bentley with many lands and castles in Brittany, and Jeanne de Clisson happened to be in Brittany at the same time as Bentley, and they wound up meeting up. These two were considered key players in the war and heroes on the English side, so it was natural that they would want them to meet. I don't think what anyone expected was they wound up getting married, and they actually settled in one of the castles on the coast of Brittany, Jeanne de Clisson ending her bloody path to revenge. Walter Bentley unfortunately would die just 3 years later in December 1359, and Jeanne de Clisson followed him a few weeks later at the age of 59, which is remarkable given her lifestyle and her path of revenge, where she started an army, attacked France, attacked all these castles, then spent 13 years on the sea as a pirate, and she died a peaceful death, married again, back in Brittany. It's absolutely crazy, and what most people could only dream of in a life like that. So while this is considered a long life for the time and relatively peaceful death for her, it's said that she actually still haunts Clisson Castle to this day. So maybe it wasn't such a happy ending for Jeanne de Clisson, because after all, neither men died to her hands. Though she didn't personally get her revenge though, Charles de Blois would end up getting killed in a battle in 1364. And I think she would rest happy knowing that her son Oliver took after his mother and turned to the sword himself and became such a fierceful warrior that he earned himself the nickname of the Butcher on the battlefield. So that was the story of Jeanne de Clisson, badass woman of history, just absolutely lovely story. I mean, it's sad, but this is the ultimate love story. Who are we kidding? It's absolutely romantic. It's so sweet. She spent 1 year for every year of her marriage as a pirate, just killing all these people, getting her revenge in her own way. Not only is she a woman to look up to, it's a sweet story. This one was nice to read about. I enjoyed learning this a lot. I hope you guys did too. And if you guys want me to cover any more badass ladies of history, I've got a list, but drop them down below. It's possible they're not on there, and I would love to explore them. So thanks for taking this journey with me. I hope it was as fun and heartwarming for you guys as it was for me. And I'll catch you all later on the next episode of the Decay Learning Center. Till then, mateys.